So I'll get us started. My name is Lyle Scott. I'm the principal of Footprint. To give you a little bit of a background about the people that are up here, we got together virtually last week to do a little bit of planning for this, and I found it very educational. I learned a lot, and I'm hoping that you also can learn a little bit out of this section. I have a mechanical engineer by background, have worked on various campuses, have been a facility manager in a past life. I am the founding principal of Footprint, which is a national energy and sustainability firm across the country. Tabor, I'd like you to sort of introduce yourself and a little bit about SPG, if you could.
Should I just yell? There we go. So Tabor Ustromsky with Sustainable Projects Group. I'm the president of the organization. So our team, mostly we work with facilities managers. We're in the private and public sector. So we work for a lot of government organizations, but we do work with a lot of post-secondary education groups as well. Typically, we're focusing on the built environment. So we do a good job at looking at what's existing in place and how we retrofit that to fit with whatever the needs are on campus. So most of the work my team does with the facilities managers is either finding, right now it's a lot of incentive money. I heard some folks talking earlier about the CMHC. There's a lot of funding through those groups. We work with the Canada Infrastructure Bank as well. Just trying to find sort of low cost capital to help sort of execute those plans. So we help make the plans, then we help execute the plans. And I think today my role on the panel is mostly talking from a technology standpoint. What are the cool things that we're seeing on campus? What are the technologies that are getting put in place, whether we're talking about generation, storage, energy efficiency, decarb, et cetera. So that's me.
So we've assembled a handful of slides just to sort of walk us through. If we could get those up on the screen, that'd be great. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask David to kick it off. And for those of us who aren't as familiar with the University of Northern BC, if you could tell us a little bit about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Lyle. And you put it really well. Really what it is I lobbied for us academic types to have props. And so I wanted a couple pictures just so you get a bit of a sense of what, in my case, our campus looks like. This is the University of Northern British Columbia. It's a young campus. The place was opened in 1994. And as you can see, we are nestled in the forest, and that's lovely. And a lot of our students come because they love nature and all that, but it can also be a liability. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And yeah, I've been with the university a little while. I used to be an energy manager. I'm also a mechanical engineer, so you're going to get lots of energy geeks talking to you today. We're up in Prince George, which is geographically right in the middle of the province. And on the left, right there, you can see at the top, we have 2 housing buildings on campus. We have about 500 beds, something like that. And we've been on a bit of a journey to try and heat the campus with something other than burning natural gas. And what you can see on the bottom there was about 14 years ago, we fired up a bioenergy plant, which again, I'll also talk about more in a bit. But really, I wanted to get a picture of what that looks like. It's not always open like that, but it's essentially a big wood stove. And okay, a complicated wood stove, but it's allowed us to shift our energy mix on campus. And this thing here, our energy manager a number of years ago put this together. The straws denote the piping network that we have to distribute hot water between our various buildings on campus. And the Post-it notes are representing the GHG emissions from various things on campus. And the yellow ones and the blue ones are what we've displaced through our work to date with bioenergy. And the red ones denote the natural gas that we still have on campus. And we'll talk a little bit more as we go through the panel about our decarbonization work. Thanks, Lyle, and over to you, Vasily.
Yes, Vasily, if you could tell us a little bit about University of Saskatchewan.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So my name is Vasily. I'm Energy and Emissions Officer at the University of Saskatchewan. And let me introduce you to the University of Saskatchewan. For some people, it's referred as Paris on Prairies. So we have about 23,000 students on campus. We own 267 buildings. We have satellite campuses. Our main campus is located in Saskatoon, which is located on a Treaty 6 territory, homeland of many First Nations and Métis. We have on the campus about 108 buildings. and that composes about 93% of our building stock, which is about 685,000 square meters. So a couple of years ago, our leadership put together a critical path to sustainability, which is actually based on sustainable development goals and based on impacts rather than on inputs and outputs. And this path is introducing us to 5 commitments. My part is focusing on model the way, where we're talking about reducing our energy, greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a very busy slide, and that's what I do, and I do it on a daily basis. I want to draw your attention to orange color here, and it's very different from BC. So our geographical location is very different, and our electricity is coming from burning natural gas and coal. That's why most of our emissions are coming from using the electricity. And we have our goals to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 45% from 2010 levels by 2030. And we want to achieve net carbon zero by 2015. So this is just a quick example how we're relying on a utility company. When COVID started, well, after the COVID, well, during the COVID, we started getting more students on campus, and our electrical consumption started to go up by 8%. But it was also very dry summer, and utilities, they didn't have a lot of mix of hydropower, and they were burning more coal. So there were a lot more greenhouse gas emissions, and our footprint from greenhouse gas emissions standpoint went up by 30%. So this is me, and I'm passing it over to Maximilian.
So Max, you're with the University of British Columbia, and you're already partway down your energy transition.
Yeah, hi everybody. Microphone is working? Yeah, great. Yeah, so Max Niwas, a climate action planner. So in my job, I quarterback and coordinate UBC's broader climate response, both on the operational side, but also around the scope 3 side, where I work with lots of fun colleagues and academics. Before diving in, I just want to zoom out a little bit and just picture the challenge that we're facing. So UBC, we're moving from a 100-year-old, very inefficient, entirely fossil fuel-based campus, and we're hoping to move in the journey of moving towards a sustainable, vibrant, super energy efficient campus that's entirely powered by renewable energy. That's the journey. We have a lot of old infrastructure, 100-year-old district energy system that we upgraded over time, lots of old buildings, and for better or worse, that's just the reality that we have. Sustainability and climate action is something UBC is in UBC's DNA, or so we like to say. Oftentimes, I think we have shown leadership, but in the end, it's been the students that have really pushed us and said, "What you're doing is not enough. It's you need to increase your ambition." And here's just a photo from the climate emergency strikes in 2019 that led to the Board of Governors declaring a climate emergency declaration, which increased emphasis on climate action and through more research and teaching, divestments, but also things like increasing the ambition of our operational plans. So that gives a bit of an overview of the journey that we are on. So we have a commitment through our Climate Action Plan 2030, which came out of these strikes, to reduce emissions by 85% below 2007 by 2030 and to achieve net zero by 2035. So these are ambitious numbers. We're working very hard to get on track and to achieve them, but the years are clicking past fast. And this journey and this graph, it's a bit cluttered here, but up to the end of the gray line there, that's where current investments get us to. So once they're properly functioning and they're installed, but they're not commissioned yet, or we have issues, that will get us to around 55 to 60% reduction. We have there's a long list of actions, over 100 actions in the climate action plan. I'm not going to dive in and give a laundry list, obviously, but I thought one quick example maybe sort of helps with the conversation. And that is one key action is that we have a commitment to have 100% of the energy into our district energy system. So similarly to my colleagues, we have a district energy system that 100% of the energy will come from low carbon sources by 2030. And that's a firm commitment we're working towards, and we're currently in feasibility and design stages of that. And that's what our biomass, that's what our district energy system is going to look like. So this used to be a super inefficient natural gas steam system, and we've converted that to a super efficient hot water system, reduced overall energy consumption by 25% of campus. And then we've transitioned to biomass as our base load plant, investing a lot into condensing economizers, waste heat recovery wherever we can. Then currently we're we're exploring in detail a 10 megawatt electric boiler that's paired to a big thermal storage battery, so we can run it at nighttime and we have access capacity, for example. And then for the last coldest days, we are going to rely on some renewable natural gas that we're going to purchase from wastewater treatment plants or landfills or agricultural operations. That's the journey that we're on. Just one bit of, we're going to talk about resiliency. One piece of resiliency that we are really focused on is resiliency to future carbon liabilities. And we just did some analysis on what the carbon liabilities would be. And the orange line would have been if we had stayed at business as usual performance. And in that scenario, we would have faced liabilities around $20 million per year by 2030. And through our climate action plan, if we get there, and we're working hard to achieve it, but it's going to be tough, we're going to be able to reduce that to around 1.5 million. So it'd be around $18 million of annual savings that'll help pay back for some of these projects. And that's it for me. Thank you.
So David, when we spoke last week, yes, the conversation did touch a lot on decarbonization, but you took it in a different direction than I thought was very important and very interesting. You talked about resiliency to climate events, to disasters, to some of the financial struggles that we're seeing in terms of utility costing. If I could have recorded it last week, I would have, but I didn't. I'm hoping you could try your best to sort of share those thoughts with everyone.
That's a challenge, Lyle. You're asking me to remember something that happened last week. Yeah, and really, it started talking about, actually it was mentioned earlier, the wildfires. We had a bad wildfire season. I can't remember what it was, a number of years ago. And the city of Williams Lake was evacuated, and a lot of those evacuees came to Prince George, and we actually housed a whole bunch of them in our existing housing buildings. And that was, I'm going to call it an experience. We learned a lot. And I think that it's an important thing to consider when we're planning new housing, and also consider as our disaster response, do we open up our universities for this? I'm not going to answer that question right now, but we learned a lot out of that. And we're gearing up for quite a wildfire season potentially this year as well. And so it's got us looking at, okay, what are our responses going to be, and what does that look like? But another thing that happened was a number of years ago, Enbridge had a pipeline explosion, uncontrolled pressure event, and it was actually visible from our campus. The news photos of that were actually taken from basically the Prince George campus of UNBC. And so we had front row seats on that event. Fortunately, the repercussions of it didn't really play out for us, but it did for everybody in the Lower Mainland here. A lot of institutions found that natural gas prices spiked incredibly, and they started looking at what are alternative fuels that we might be able to use, and how can we shut down parts of our campus and things like that. It really prompted quite a pointed conversation about how do we use energy on campuses. And because of that price signal, it also caused actually the slide that Max just had here, that carbon tax increase that's coming, like from 2 years ago to 2030, the carbon tax that we pay on our fossil fuels is going to triple in BC. I don't know that that's as a part of the conversation as it needs to be everywhere other than at some of our institutions. That's going to have a huge impact if we haven't divested ourselves of carbon as a heating source. But there are other things coming. In the news last week, it was announced that Trans Mountain Pipeline, the expansion, had oil in it for the first time. Well, the whole purpose of that pipeline is to raise the costs of oil in Western Canada. Yes, for export, but the downstream effect of that is going to be, we're going to see prices rise for our energy. Likewise, in my neck of the woods, Coastal GasLink has been putting in a pipeline that brings natural gas out to Kitimat. And eventually they're going to get to the point where they can export LNG. That is also going to drive up the domestic price of natural gas in our province. And those are price signals that are going to come. And what I'm looking at is how can we be resilient as university campuses and as housing providers to those changes as they come so that they don't have as much of an impact on our energy costs. Another thing, I said to somebody yesterday or last week in Prince George, oh, I'm coming down to Vancouver. Oh, you're going to the land of the white Tesla. If you've been driving around Vancouver a bit, you might have seen a few Teslas. As populations shift into electric vehicles, we're going to see changes on our electricity grid. We don't entirely understand what those are, but my prediction is we're going to see more emphasis, as Max said, on things like charging or running your electric boiler at night. You have different reasons for that at UBC, but broadly speaking, time of use of electricity is going to be something you're going to see in your bill. BC Hydro, and if you're from Ontario, you know about that. You've been dealing with that for decades. But in BC, we haven't been. There's a pilot BC Hydro is running this summer on residential use for time of use billing, but that's going to come as we start having more constraints on our electricity grid. And those constraints are likely going to have price pressures as well. And so all of that means that I think we're going to talk a lot about energy in the next little bit, especially as it relates to our budgets. Did that kind of capture it, Lyle?
That was right on track. Vasily, you had some other thoughts also, specifically around housing and power generation on campus.
Right, yeah, it's in our geographical location, heating is very important. And it can get to life-threatening conditions if you don't have enough heating. And we have around 1,200 students living on campus, on the main campus, and they live in older houses. They live not very energy efficient houses, but these buildings are becoming heritage buildings, and it's very hard to do any energy retrofits, and it gets more expensive to the point that it's better to demolish it, but we can't because it's a heritage building. So we have a district energy system on campus that supplies heating and chilled water for our buildings, for student housing, and we have heating provided for 2 hospitals on campus as well. So in the district energy system was designed to run without natural gas or electricity for 6 hours continuously, so at full load. So it's going to provide all the heating for the university buildings, for hospitals, and yeah, some buildings have gensets to provide some electricity, but again, the most important aspect is heating and providing the heating. And just because the winter is so cold, this winter, like living in Saskatoon, in 10 days, I had in my house power cut out twice and the water cut out once. And just sitting there and getting it into the situation gets you like thinking and getting worried, you know, that without the heating, it's hard to survive in Saskatoon. So yeah, it's we always have to keep in mind the resiliency and natural effects on our infrastructure that needs to be factored in.
Now, Max, at UBC, you've incorporated multiple fuel sources into your energy transition. Was resiliency part of that thought process? How does it help?
So that in the district energy system specifically, we built, we've transitioned to a very diversified supply. And I think we're starting to appreciate just how great the resiliency benefits are. I think we probably underestimated that originally. But it's great, and we've had to rely on it multiple times already. Natural gas, the natural gas pipeline explosion, and then the flooding, got rid of flooded our biomass supply, all these unforeseen circumstances. So having diversity in supply is really great. We have quite a few buildings that are not connected to the district energy system, so we're looking to electrify those. And their resiliency is a big part, especially as we transition to novel technologies, big capacity heat pumps for larger buildings, which not yet that are reliable, right? So we don't have Vasily's life or death concerns. For us, it's the operations of the campus, but we're trying, that's one of the key challenges in implementing these new technologies, because our track record is just not that good yet with them.
Interesting. Tabor, what are you seeing as far as the sort of current best practices in energy generation? And then I'm going to ask the exact same question, current best practices in energy storage, and how much is that changing the conversation?
Yeah, in general, I think the most important thing with any of the universities and colleges is to understand that there's a huge diversity of needs and opportunities from each different group, right? Whether we're talking Northern British Columbia, out in Saskatchewan, we're talking right on the coastal community. So it really depends on the campus. In general, though, for generation, I think the biggest thing to think about is to try to diversify. Everybody knows solar, like solar or photovoltaic. One of the challenges we find is with the government, depending on the program they put in place, there'll be tons of that type of technology that gets implemented. So for example, in Alberta, we have tons of solar PV. In Manitoba, most of the clients we work with, we were able to get funding for solar thermal. So a combo solar PV, solar thermal. And so the majority of campus is actually heating up water on the roof and then pumping that down into the system. So depends on location, but we find, trying to think of some of the other ones. For generation, you don't need to just generate electricity. The goal is to generate heat. We find the solar wall technology. We've got a couple campuses, if the circumstances are right. One of the campus facility managers told us, and I wish I could get the quote and put it on our website, but he called it cheating. He said it felt like cheating, because basically what was happening, they were getting so much heat off of that system, often they had to turn that thing off. So again, very specific applications, many places. I think we looked at UBC, there wasn't a lot of locations for a good solar wall. So yeah, solar wall, solar thermal combined with solar PV was a common one. And then the larger campuses having that geothermal system. So if you get the right circumstances underneath where the school is built, most of the campuses across the country right now, they know they're on the right location. They're in the process of putting in a lot of those geothermal systems. But yeah, we're seeing those as the main generation pieces, and they also tie into storage, which we'll talk about in a bit, because especially with the geothermal or the geo exchange systems. But, yeah.
Quickly, we explored geothermal, and we had the worst geology the consultant had ever seen in his life.
Happy to come take a look.
I would like to add something about the solar PVs on our campus in Saskatchewan. It gets a little bit challenging to build a business case, because with all this carbon emission intensive grid, it comes the price for the electricity that they're supplying is very low. So with the dirty grid, you get a cheaper price, and it's very hard to justify any PV solar panels that will pay off eventually in 25 years on campus, with the dirty grid.
David, what have you learned so far with your decarbonization story at UNBC?
What have I learned? I learned we're bad at telling the story. So I should have had a slide in there showing our decarbonization process so far. Putting up that bioenergy plant, we've reduced our carbon emissions by 65% from 2007, which probably exceeds most other institutions, full stop. Now, that's dependent, and I'll say it right out, that it's dependent on you considering that biomass is carbon neutral. And there's a huge debate about that. What I'll say on that is the wood that we're burning on campus. So sorry, let me back up. We take waste wood from the sawmill industry. We put it into that thing that I had a picture of that I call the wood stove. It's actually a gasification system, and we heat water, and we use that water to heat the campus instead of running our big natural gas boilers. We still have the boilers. They're our backup. So backup. That's one of the things I learned. Have a backup. Size your system appropriately so that it's running at peak efficiency. Our system is sized for 85% of our peak heat load, and that's on purpose. We'll still use our natural gas boilers for that final 15% when it's 35 below out, but it means that the bioenergy plant runs year round and it runs at peak efficiency for most of the time. But coming back to that wood supply, the wood that we burn is going to get burned anyway. If we don't burn it, it gets turned into pellets, it gets shipped to England, and it gets burned there for electricity production. It's going to get burned. And if it doesn't get burned, it actually sits in a sawmill yard and rots and produces a lot more methane. We're better off burning it. As long as we use the heat. And historically, sawmills used to just burn it to get rid of it because they have to. It's a volume reduction problem. One of the other things I've learned, I often describe myself as a recovering academic. I did a bunch of schooling a while ago, but what that means is I get to sit on things like PhD review committees. And we had a student come through looking at biochar. And if you recall that slide I had earlier with the Post-it notes, off in the corner, there's a thing about the size of a pencil eraser, and it said char next to it. And that represents, we could take wood, convert it into charcoal, and bury it. And if we buried 250 tons a year of that, we would offset all the emissions from our campus. There's a lot of talk about carbon offsets well, carbon offsets, but also carbon capture and sequestration. A lot of that is looking at pulling carbon dioxide out of the air, and there's technology, and you can promote all that and work on it, and we are, and that's good. Char is something we can do today, and it also it's pretty stable. You can bury it in the ground, it'll be there for a long time. We looked at it, things moved on and we didn't actually build it, but it's actually within the realm of possibility for us to do that and start offsetting all the emissions back to the original campus construction. So there's lots of stuff out there. That's some of what we've learned. The other thing that we've learned and what I'm looking at more and more these days is not about our energy systems, but about our built environment, our buildings and their building envelope, and how efficient we can make that in terms of keeping the heat in, so that hopefully we can get to the point where rather than buying electricity to keep lights on and runs computers and buying heat to keep the place comfortable, we can use that electricity we're already converting into heat to run our lights and computers and keep ourselves warm enough with that. Basically, it means get enough insulation in our walls that our lights will keep us warm.
So I have an unplanned question. Is it a coincidence that we have two representatives from two of the three universities up here on stage that have significantly decarbonized with biomass? Should 66% of universities and post-secondary institutions across the country decarbonize with biomass, or is this just an anomaly? That's open to the group.
I'll jump in. I said we had a big wood stove. It's actually a piece of industrial infrastructure, and we're in Prince George. We have a huge industrial base. It works for us to run that thing because we can draw staff from our industrial clients, and they steal from us too much. But that doesn't work in everybody's context. It also doesn't work in everybody's geography. Actually, there's three, because this campus here has significant heating from biomass as well. SFU does. So it can work in some places, and I believe you guys are getting wood. What is your wood source primarily these days?
It's from the Fraser Valley. Yeah, also.
But it's tree trimmings, right? It's not as much industrial.
It's waste wood mostly, but it's, yeah, we're trying to diversify the supply.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges with that, though, it just, honestly, we talked about different provinces having different technologies taking hold. Many of the school districts, the K-12 that we work with as well in British Columbia, have wood pellet boilers as well. They hate them, they can't manage them, they're too small for the system. But because a policy was written that this is waste wood, therefore emission reductions are happening, it comes from a specific program that the government put in place, they all got free multi-million-dollar wood pellet stoves. So it's not properly sized. That's where the government means well, puts policy in place, but didn't actually follow it all the way through. And then now all of a sudden most of the K-12 schools can't get enough wood pellets. So they're shipping them in from across the country.
Wow.
And for us, we have a wood pellet boiler as well. And it was sized incorrectly. and required a ridiculous amount of maintenance, and it was a total pain in the neck. That blue pipe thing that was up there was a low temperature district energy system we put in a number of years ago to supply heat to our campus building, or our campus housing primarily, and our daycare. And we moved the pellet boiler to be the anchor heat load on that system. And now it runs flat out year round. It's happy. Boilers talk to you. I didn't, not everybody knows this, but that boiler is very happy now. And it runs flat out. And my maintenance crew is happy too, because it needs a lot less work. We also had then our pellet manufacturer closed down, and we had to go find a different pellet manufacturer to purchase from. Fortunately, in our area, there are a number of them, and we had somebody else step up. But yes, it is not without its challenges. The city of Prince George operates a district energy system based on wood. The smartest thing they did is outsource the wood burning to a local sawmill, because they already have the expertise to do that. And all they do is purchase hot water. Way smarter way of going.
And if I can share an anecdote is, I showed the graph, our current investments are going to get us to around 55 or 60%, and biomass was a big part of that. And then we're looking to take us the next step down. And we consciously decided that I think we've taken biomass as far as we can. We could do another biomass project. It served as well, but there are issues with it. And that's why we're looking at alternative scenarios. If you start from scratch, like our colleagues at UBC Okanagan, they have a low temperature district energy system. They can now use a CO2 heat pump and get an incredible coefficient of 4. There's no very engineering talk, but if you start from scratch, you would design a different system probably.
So Vasily, one of the things that we've experienced at Footprint, particularly working in Saskatchewan and in Alberta, in those markets where they have where the electricity is high emission, it takes a different approach, and really it's very important to emphasize efficiency of the buildings first before you look at fuel switching. Have you found something similar?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really good point that it needs to be phased. So the reason why we're looking at the biomass is because we can really use the electricity right now to meet our commitments. If we switch all our heating to electricity tomorrow, putting aside the cost and the capacity issues, we'll be emitting more greenhouse gas emissions right away. So that's why we're looking at the low carbon emissions sources of energy to heat our buildings. And our just quick calculations got us to the year of 2030, where we actually can break even with the electrical boilers other than burning natural gas. So it is a multi-phase approach that we just finished the feasibility study, how to decarbonize our campus. It's yeah, we have to look at 3 different things. First is the energy efficiency in our buildings. The second thing is decarbonize the supply. And the third thing is build better. Just more build new buildings with the standards that are, green building standards.
Tabor, tell me a little bit about energy storage. What have you seen? Is it the future? What should we be doing?
Yeah, energy storage is a tricky one, especially for campuses. Just the demand is so high with keeping these campuses going for periods of time. It's a big part of the planning and the solution. We talked about issues with fires. We didn't even mention heat dome issues. We didn't mention like all these other things that are coming up. So facilities managers and the campuses are trying to find how do we maintain those systems and how do we keep all those buildings going. Some of what we've seen from the hospitals that we've worked on, there's hydrogen backup systems which get in place, but again, that's only for a certain period of time. And if you've got available access to hydrogen to continue to run or to build and store large hydrogen tanks on site. We've got some K-12 schools which are trying to go like lithium ion batteries and these types of backups where they have electric bus systems, but that it's not feasible. We haven't seen that replicating outside of one particular school division. Other than that, like we're a big fan if the opportunity's there, obviously not for UBC, but for other places where that geo exchange system is available, like we find in the interior or UBCO, lots of opportunities where you can actually, it's not, I mean, technically it's a battery, right? You're storing heat underground and as needed, you can pull from that. That's probably the most common, the most money we've seen gone into battery storage systems is that geo exchange. Other than that, there's not a lot of different opportunities. You can't beat the diesel backup, right? It's there, it's available, or natural gas backup, because that's just the systems are all built around that. And typically the amount of emissions and the amount of time that systems get used should be fairly limited. So it's not bang for your buck. There's so much other opportunity in other systems out there. So it's pretty much it. Nothing sexier than that.
What you're saying is that the financial challenges just right now aren't supporting battery storage in most markets.
Absolutely. Yeah, in most markets, it's typically too high.
The one area that we have seen is in markets where they do have time of use pricing, Ontario. We've seen utilities such as Hydro Ottawa supporting battery backup at a utility scale to support large campus projects, whether those are healthcare projects, district energy type scale projects. It was discussed a little bit about how the energy market, how the electricity market is likely to change with these time of use prices that we're likely to see in many markets as, you know, if the white Teslas do start to invade and other things like that change. We are seeing heat pumps as being the number one source of heating in many markets. Which is different. It always was a gas-fired boiler as being the number one source of heating. So the markets are changing, and we're likely going to see technologies such as energy storage start to take a larger role.
Lyle, questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Questions from the audience? We may have answered all of them.
I can speak to that. Well, and my ears aren't the best, so maybe I misheard the question. It was around scope 3 emissions, essentially, commuting. Are we looking to address emissions beyond just our campus operations, commuting? Yeah, so if I may. So that's coming out of the climate emergency strikes from the students. We got a specific mandate to, for the first time, focus on the scope 3 emissions aspect, and we're now really kicking off that work. And it's challenging. On the one hand, it's challenging because the university has much less input into those choices, but the university community has much more agency to get involved. So we're having work, for example, on the food systems. We have implemented a food label that ranks on essentially on a traffic light system, the GHG emissions of food choices. That's in most food outlets on campus, and those emissions are equivalent to essentially all our operational emissions. Commuting emissions are by far our biggest source. We're working on SkyTrain, obviously. We just brought an e-bike share system to campus. That's looking lots on air travel with faculty, which is a huge source of emissions. So as we are reducing our scope 1 emissions quickly, the scope 3 emissions are becoming increasingly bigger pie, or share of the pie. So I think by 2030, it'll be something like 8 to 10 times as big as our operational emissions.
Time.
Next. So it's certainly on our radar to look at the scope 3 emissions and commuting, telecommuting. But first, yeah, we have to focus on our scope 1 and scope 2, which is heating, cooling, electricity. If you compare our numbers with UBC, looking at 150,000 tons per year emissions, it's just the worst nightmare, I think, for BC is, and we have to tackle it first before getting into telecommuting or commuting to the campus.
We did some work with the Canadian Association of University Business Officers on their decarbonization, looking at decarbonization for them. One of the things that we did was kind of state of the nation, looking at what's going on across all the universities. And it was remarkable to us how some universities, frankly, in my opinion, understate their scope 3 emissions. Some of them have them as a sliver compared to their scope 1 and 2, which most likely is not the case. Not going to get in an arm wrestle with them about their specific stats, but to me, they just look wrong. And we do see some universities taking some progressive measures. One of them is related to campus housing, making it so that it's easy for people to walk to campus, walk to their classes. One of the other things that we see is very simple. It's just a partnership with the local transit to have public transit passes as just you walk on with your student card. That's done on many campuses. It's also not done on many campuses. So there's some really easy wins, I think, that are there. There's also some harder issues. Very good question. Do we have one last question from the floor? Yeah.
I'll have a brief comment on it. We're looking at it. You mentioned about 5 things in succession. We're looking at all of them except for the master plan aspect of it. When our master plan, most recent one, came out in 2018, it wasn't really on people's radar. It's much more there now. My personal take on it is I'm trying to encourage our employees to find a way to charge at home. And if I keep saying that message, though, when I build student housing, we have to then look at, okay, well then that applies on both sides of the equation. So where do we incorporate that into our planning?
Yeah, so UBC, it's funny, I'm just doing the submission for the low carbon fuel standard, which is due like 3 days, and I have lots of work to do there. So I have to get all our credits for that. Yeah, so we have about 100 EV chargers, including 7 fast chargers on campus. We're making a fair bit of money off the low carbon fuel credits that we can sell now in BC, which is valued around 4 times the cost of electricity. So there's a nice business case there. One of the aspects we're thinking of now, how can we use the publicly available chargers, how can we use them at night to support the facilities vehicles as we transition the facilities vehicles to EV, so we don't have to double build infrastructure. That's kind of how we're operating right now.
And there's a use case depending on where it is. So with British Columbia, a big part of this conversation at the conference last year was about EV chargers in these facility plans. And one of the presentations we gave in British Columbia, because of the low carbon fuel standard, we can sell those emissions. I think it was close to $400 a ton is typically what we're getting. So there is a very large revenue generation opportunity in British Columbia if you're putting EV chargers and selling. But it becomes very different. We do the same thing. There's some EV chargers we've done in the Alberta schools. That opportunity isn't quite there in the same way it is here. So again, totally depends on the campus, but very, very important.
Yeah, USask is very early in this game. So we only have 1 charging station for EVs. And there is a lot of debate, again, because of dirty grid at university or in Saskatchewan. But it's in the working, and in the future, we're right now in the working of putting the position paper for the university how to adopt EV charging stations on campus.
So I'd like to thank you for your time, allowing us to speak with you. Thank you to the group. I quite enjoyed this.
On-campus energy generation, thank you to the panelists. Vasily Bigeldev, David Klaus, Maximilian Kinnewasser, Lyle Scott, Tabor Yastrzemski. We'll do a stage reset and start creative capital raising solutions for post-secondary institutions and government involvement.